At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Aram. Let's begin. The 10,000 warships were meant to serve not only as a display of the Varsok War Alliance's power, but also as a grand debut battle. An opportunity for each species under the Varsok banner to showcase their technology and strength. This competitive spirit, however, led to the inclusion of several ships that were hardly combat-ready. High Commander Trom was not particularly concerned. In his view, there was no way humanity's primitive radar systems could detect such details, let alone target them specifically. The war room aboard the flagship was busy. Trom stood at the head of the tactical table, his imposing figure the tallest of the table. His backwards-facing horns, 11 of them, as was typical for mature Varsok males, curved along his skull like a crown of bone spears, each one pointing toward his spine rather than forward. The curious asymmetry of Varsok horn growth always produced odd numbers, and Trom took pride in his count. Fewer than some elders, but more than most commanders of his age. His pink eyes scanned the three other Alliance leaders gathered around the projection, and as his gaze moved from one leader to the next, his exterior began to stiffen. Not fur, not skin, not scales, but the soft mineral deposition that covered every Varsok's body had the texture of damp clay, pliable when relaxed but capable of hardening to near stone when stressed or threatened. Now, as apprehension radiated from his subordinate commanders, Trom's outer layer went almost rigid, the sensation like dried mud cracking in summer heat. Something was wrong.
"Ivix,"
Trom said.
"why are your antennae soft?"
The Vogzar commander straightened, his green antennae, the same verdant shade as his skin, drooping further despite the obvious attempt at composure. Ivix looked exactly like what humans would conjure in their primitive minds when they thought of the word alien. Smooth green skin stretched over an elongated skull, large black eyes, a thin frame.
"I know what it means when your kind displays that posture,"
Trom continued, taking a step closer to the holographic Earth.
"Confidence makes your antennae rigid, elevated. Fear makes them soft, drooping. So I ask again, what concerns you?"
Ivix finally spoke.
"High Commander, I am afraid the humans will notice the weak ships."
"Notice?"
Trom's mineral coating cracked audibly as he turned fully toward Ivix.
"They can't even detect most of our vessels with their crude instruments. What makes you think—"
"Please let me finish,"
Ivix continued.
"Of course, they couldn't do anything against our stronger vessels, but my species, we have too many of the weaker ships positioned in the middle formations. Display vessels, really. They probably wouldn't withstand a direct nuclear detonation."
Trom felt his jaw plates grinding.
"You think the humans would dare? You think they would see 10,000 ships darkening their sky, and their first instinct would be to attack the weakest among them? No."
He shook his head, the motion making his horns scrape against each other with a sound like sharpening blades.
"They will be paralyzed by fear. They will see our numbers, our obvious technological superiority, and they will understand that any aggression would give us justification to turn their planet into glass."
He activated a secondary projection, showing a blue-green world labeled in Varsok script.
"Telvon 4, 40 cycles ago. We approached with 500 ships and demanded their surrender. They had a larger population than Earth, more advanced weapons, better planetary defenses. Do you know what happened?
Silence filled the war room.
They surrendered within 3 hours of our arrival. We have nothing to worry about.
I am not convinced.
The voice came from Moara, the Prilly representative. She stood with her arms crossed, her pink skin rigid, and her green hair, long and flowing, framed a face with elongated ears.
Speak your concern,
Trom said, working to keep his tone neutral.
I am not convinced that simply appearing above Earth and demanding surrender is the optimal approach,
Moara said, her voice calm.
My species has spent considerable time studying human history, reviewing their cultural archives, analyzing their response patterns to threats, both internal and external. What we have discovered is troubling.
Troubling?
Trom felt a crack spread across his shoulder plating.
Humanity does not surrender quietly, High Commander. In their most recent global conflict, they fought for 6 years despite catastrophic losses. Entire cities reduced to rubble, millions dead. When faced with invasion, they do not calculate odds and surrender when defeat seems logical. They calculate the cost they can inflict on their enemy before falling. They have a saying, better to die on your feet than live on your knees.
Moara stepped closer to the projection, her green hair swaying.
Look at this, the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartan warriors held off hundreds of thousands. They knew they would die. They fought anyway. Can you explain this?
Ancient history,
Trom argued, feeling his certainty waver but refusing to show it.
Primitive conflicts between primitive factions. This is different. We are not another human nation. We are visitors from the stars with technology they can barely comprehend. The gap is simply too wide. They will fold.
Moara opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, her ears drooping. She stepped back from the projection table, falling silent.
If I may speak,
the fourth commander, Civi, moved into the light. His appearance always unsettled Trom, though he would never admit it. The Keltorian's skin looked like melted candle wax, perpetually flowing and reforming across his frame. His eyes were completely opaque, milky white orbs that saw nothing. His species had evolved in vast cave systems on a world where light never reached. They navigated by sound, by vibration, by senses Trom couldn't fully comprehend.
Speak,
Trom said.
You focus on human technology,
Civi said, his voice emerging from a mouth that didn't seem to move properly.
You focus on their weapons, their defenses, their ability to harm our fleet. This is correct military thinking, but you ignore something more fundamental about their psychology. Which is? Humans are primitive in ways that transcend technology. They are emotional creatures, High Commander. Irrational. They make decisions based on concepts we would consider juvenile. Honor, dignity, pride.
Civi's wax hands gestured vaguely.
I have reviewed the same historical data as Commander Moara, and I have reached a different conclusion. I believe humans are likely to decide on hurting our fleet at the cost of their own lives and their own planet, rather than being logical. Not because they think they can win, but because surrendering without resistance is psychologically
intolerable to them.
That makes no sense.
Trom felt his mineral coating beginning to crack in multiple places, stress fractures spreading across his arms and chest.
You're suggesting they would choose guaranteed extinction over probable survival.
Yes,
Civvy said simply.
I am suggesting exactly that.
Enough of this!
Trom's voice boomed through the war room, resonating off the metal walls.
This council will not be paralyzed by speculation and fear. This is the Varsok War Alliance, called such because my species knows war. We have conquered worlds. We have pacified 100 more through mere displays of force. We understand how species react when confronted with overwhelming power.
He moved to the center of the table, his hardened form towering over the holographic Earth.
I have fought in battles you could not imagine. I have seen civilizations fall before a single shot was fired because they understood the futility of resistance. Humanity will be no different. When they see their sky go dark with the sight of 10,000 ships, when they feel the weight of our presence pressing down on their atmosphere, they will understand. They will surrender.
Trom's pink eyes blazed as he looked at each commander in turn.
And to prove my confidence, to demonstrate that humanity poses no threat, I will descend to their surface personally. I will meet their leaders face to face under the protection of our strongest ship. I will stand on their planet, surrounded by their primitive soldiers, and I will demand their surrender. When they comply, and they will comply, the entire galaxy will see that the Varsok War Alliance is unstoppable.
Ivix's antennae quivered.
High Commander, is that wise? To place yourself at risk?
There is no risk,
Trom interrupted.
Their weapons cannot penetrate the shielding of the Dominion's fist. Their missiles move at a crawl compared to our defense systems, and even if, somehow, they attempted something foolish, I will be protected by layered personal shielding. I will be completely safe while demonstrating absolute dominance. It is the perfect symbol.
Moara shifted uncomfortably.
If you believe this is the correct course...
I do not believe. I know.
Trom straightened, his posture radiating absolute certainty, despite the cracks spreading across his mineral coating.
Prepare the fleet for demonstration formation. We move to Earth within the hour. This council is dismissed.
The three commanders exchanged glances, Ivix's antennae drooping further, Moara's ears flat against her skull, Civy's opaque eyes somehow seeming troubled despite their inability to show expression. But they nodded, one by one, and began filing out of the war room. Trom watched them go, then turned back to the holographic Earth, spinning peacefully in the projection field. Such a small planet, such primitive inhabitants. This would be the easiest conquest in Varsok history, his moment of ultimate triumph, the glory that would cement his position not just as High Commander of the Alliance, but as the greatest military leader of his generation. Nothing could go wrong. His mineral coating flexed, the cracks sealing themselves as his confidence returned. In a few hours, humanity would surrender, and the galaxy would know the true power of the Varsok War Alliance. 6 hours later, Trom stood in the deployment bay of the Dominion's Fist, the flagship's most powerful vessel, positioned directly above what humans called Washington, D.C. Through the transparent sections of the hull, he could see Earth's surface below. Peaceful. Surrounding the flagship were the other 9,999 ships of the Alliance fleet, each one holding position with mathematical exactness. The display was impressive. Trom had reviewed the holographic projections from Earth's surface. The fleet was visible from the ground as a blanket of shadows that blocked out the sun for hundreds of miles. The psychological impact would be devastating. Humanity would look up and see their sky conquered, their heavens claimed by an invading force beyond their comprehension. High Commander, all systems are ready for your descent. The voice belonged to Sub-Commander Krell, a younger Varsok whose horn count of 11 marked him as still in his early maturity. Krell had been reviewing the deployment procedures for hours, triple-checking every system. Your personal shielding is fully charged and layered according to maximum defensive specifications.
Explain the configuration once more,
Trom said, though he had memorized every detail. He wanted to hear it again, to savor the certainty of his own invulnerability.
Of course, High Commander.
Drell activated a holographic display showing Trom's form surrounded by concentric circles of light.
You will have 7 independent shield layers. The first 3 are standard kinetic barriers. They will deflect any projectile weapon, from their primitive bullets to their most advanced anti-armor rounds. The 4th layer is a thermal dissipation field. It will disperse any energy weapon or incendiary device.
Krell's pink eyes met Trom's.
They could target you with their best machine guns or chemical weapons and nothing would happen to you.
And the delivery method?
A gravity beam will lower you from the ship to the surface at a controlled rate.
Duration?
Approximately 4 minutes from bay to ground. Long enough for humans to gather, to witness, to fear.
Trom felt satisfaction settling over him like a warm cloak.
And the broadcast?
All channels across the Alliance space are ready. Every world under Varsok protection will see your triumph in real time. Your image will be projected to billions of beings simultaneously. This will be the most watched event in our history.
Krell hesitated, then added,
Your legacy will be secured, High Commander.
Indeed.
Trom moved to the center of the deployment circle marked on the bay floor. The circular hatch beneath his feet would iris open on his command, exposing the Earth's atmosphere below.
Initiate the descent sequence.
Warning lights began flashing as the bay pressurized to match Earth's atmospheric conditions. Trom felt his mineral coating adjusting automatically, preparing for the alien environment. He had reviewed Earth's composition extensively. Nitrogen, oxygen, trace elements. Breathable, if inferior to his homeworld's richer atmosphere. The temperature below was within acceptable ranges. Everything had been calculated, measured, verified. The circular hatch irised open, revealing the sky and ground below. "Activating gravity beam," Krell announced. Purple light flooded upward through the opening, illuminating Trom from below. He felt the familiar sensation of gravity inversion as the beam locked onto his body's mass. His feet lifted from the deck slowly, dramatically. He spread his arms wide, arranging his posture for maximum impact. The broadcast would be showing this from multiple angles: cameras from Alliance ships, visual feeds from orbital platforms, even intercepted human news footage. Every being in the galaxy with access to galactic communications would see this moment. High Commander Trom descending from the heavens to accept humanity's surrender. He began to sink through the opening, the purple beam guiding him downward. Earth's sky opened above him, or below him, depending on perspective. He was falling upward or rising downward, the gravity beam making the distinction meaningless. The sensation was glorious, godlike, the power of technology making him appear supernatural to the primitives watching from the ground. The wind increased as he descended, but his shields deflected it, creating a calm bubble around his body. He could see more details now, the white stone buildings of the human capital city, the monuments to their various wars and leaders, the thousands of people gathered to witness this moment. Fear was written on their faces, visible even from this height. Some were pointing, others were raising their handheld recording devices, capturing this moment for their own primitive historical records. Good. Let them remember this day. Let them remember the moment when humanity learned its place in the cosmic hierarchy. 3 minutes into the descent, Trom could clearly see the individual humans forming the military perimeter. They wore camouflage uniforms in various patterns. Apparently, different human nations had different color schemes, a redundancy that spoke to their lack of cohesion. Their weapons were raised, tracking his descent, but he could see the futility in their postures. They knew those weapons were useless. They were maintaining a show of force because pride demanded it, but their body language screamed defeat. He recognized the human leaders standing behind the military line. Through prior communications, he had interfaced with several of Earth's most powerful individuals. Presidents, prime ministers, generals, directors of their various military and intelligence agencies. They wore white garments, apparently the color of formal diplomacy for humans. Their faces were easier to read now. Tension, fear, resignation. They knew what was coming. Trom felt a surge of triumph. This was the moment he had planned for, worked toward, sacrificed for. The culmination of his career, the guarantee of his place in history. He smiled, making sure his expression was visible to the cameras. He stretched his arms wider, a theatrical gesture of dominance. The purple beam intensified, responding to his increased confidence. For a moment, just a single, perfect moment, he felt like the most powerful being in the galaxy. Seconds to ground contact. The human soldiers shifted their positions, creating a clear landing zone. Trom could see the exact spot they had prepared for him, a circular area free of obstacles, marked with some kind of white paint. He adjusted his trajectory infinitesimally, guiding himself toward the center. His feet touched the ground. For the first time in his life, High Commander Trom stood on Earth. Around him, the human soldiers remained frozen in position, their weapons still raised, but their fingers nowhere near their triggers. The message was clear. They were armed, but would not fire. A show of capability without intent. The perfect posture of imminent surrender. Trom began scanning the crowd, wondering which human leader would step forward as their primary representative. He expected one of the presidents, perhaps the leader of the nation they called the United States, or the premier of the entity called China. These were the most powerful human factions, the ones whose surrender would cascade down to all the others. But the figure who stepped forward was none of the individuals Trom recognized from the communications. It was a human male, moving with a casual stride that seemed completely out of place in the tense atmosphere. He was of a medium height for his species, wearing a simple, dark suit. His hair was black, his skin a medium brown shade, his features suggesting mixed ancestry from multiple human ethnic groups. He was smiling as he approached. "Greetings," the human said. "I hope your journey was comfortable. I've never experienced gravity beam transport, but it looked spectacular from down here." Trom said nothing, studying this unexpected representative. The human stopped about 3 meters away, well outside any normal reach distance. "I should introduce myself. My name is Edward Brown." He chuckled, as if this were somehow amusing rather than terrifying. "Despite the very English name, I actually grew up in Japan. Long story, beautiful country, if you ever get the chance to visit under better circumstances." Edward extended his right hand, a gesture Trom recognized as a human greeting custom. Trom stared at the hand deliberately, saying nothing, letting the silence stretch. He made sure to focus his pink eyes directly on the extended appendage, making the rejection as obvious and awkward as possible. Edward's smile didn't falter. He smoothly withdrew his hand. "Right, of course. First contact protocols and all that. Different customs for different species. I understand completely." He clasped his hands behind his back, his posture relaxed, conversational. "All human leadership has agreed to designate me as our primary ambassador for this discussion. Neutral party, no national allegiances, background in interspecies communication theory." His smile widened. "So, we're here to explore peaceful solutions to what is, let's be honest, a fairly aggressive approach to first contact. That's quite a fleet you've brought. Very impressive, very intimidating. Message received. Now, what would it take, specifically, in concrete terms, for us to resolve this situation without violence?" The casual tone infuriated Trom. Trom took a step forward, his mineral coating crackling with the movement. He was significantly taller than the human, and he used that height advantage now, looming over Edward Brown.
I am High Commander Trom of the Varsok War Alliance, supreme leader of the combined forces of several conquered worlds, destroyer of the Teflon Resistance, bearer of 11 horns, commander of...
He continued listing his titles for another 30 seconds, making sure each one was translated and broadcast. This was as much for his own people as humanity. Every species in the Alliance needed to see him in this moment of triumph, needed to feel his authority.
And I come before you today with a simple message for your species. You have been judged by powers beyond your comprehension. Your technology is primitive. Your weapons are obsolete. Your defenses are meaningless. The 10,000 warships surrounding your planet represent a force capable of sterilizing your entire world in a matter of hours. No bunker can protect you. No missile can reach us. No defense can save you.
Trom paused, letting the words sink in, watching the human's face for signs of breaking. Edward Brown was still smiling, but the expression seemed frozen now, less natural.
But,
Trom continued,
the Varsok War Alliance does not desire extinction. We desire order. We desire peace.
He spread his arms wide again, the theatrical gesture visible to every camera, every eye watching this broadcast across 100 worlds.
Surrender. Submit to Alliance authority. Accept our governance. Provide resources and labor as tribute. In exchange, you will be protected, guided, elevated beyond your current primitive state.
Trom lowered his arms, his pink eyes boring into Edward Brown's face.
Just surrender, he said. We have 10,000 warships surrounding Earth. You have no other option.
The landing zone had gone absolutely silent. Trom looked around, seeing human soldiers frozen in place, their faces pale. He had won. Trom allowed himself another smile, this one broader, more satisfied. The broadcast cameras were capturing this perfectly. Then the ground shook. It wasn't an earthquake. Trom had experienced seismic activity on dozens of worlds, and this was different. This was an artificial vibration, a mechanical force transmitted through the landing pad beneath his feet. He looked down, confused as the shaking intensified. Then he looked up. The sky was drawing lines of fire. Missiles, hundreds of them, no, thousands of them. Contrails appeared across the entire visible sky, glowing trails of chemical combustion ascending from every direction. The humans had launched their missiles from sites all across the planet, a coordinated strike timed to arrive simultaneously. Trom's confusion turned to disbelief, then to panic. They were attacking. The humans were actually attacking. "Shields up!" he screamed into his communicator. Though he knew the fleet was already responding, the defensive systems would already be active, intercepting the missiles long before they reached the fleet. But there were so many missiles. The sky lit up like a second sunrise as the first wave of human weapons reached their targets. Trom watched, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing, as explosions blossomed across the fleet's formations. Not nuclear detonations. These were conventional explosives, chemical reactions releasing energy in the kiloton range. Primitive technology, the kind the Alliance had stopped using centuries ago. And they were working. Ships began to fall. Not the dreadnoughts, not the battle cruisers, not the heavy capital ships. Those vessels shrugged off the human missiles with contemptuous ease, their shields flashing but holding, their armor unmarked. But the weaker vessels, the display ships, the lightly armed escorts, the ceremonial cruisers that Ivix had warned about, those were exploding. Trom watched in absolute horror as a Volgzar ceremonial ship took a direct hit from 3 missiles simultaneously. Another ship exploded, then another, then 6 simultaneously. The human missiles weren't random. They weren't firing blindly at the fleet and hoping for lucky hits. They were targeted. They were coordinated. Somehow the humans had identified every weak vessel in the fleet and directed their strikes specifically at those targets. How? They shouldn't be able to differentiate between an Alliance dreadnought and a ceremonial display vessel, let alone target them separately. But they had. The explosions continued. Trom tried to count the losses, but gave up as the number climbed past 200. The reports told the full story. 1,500 ships destroyed. 2,000. Trom stood rooted to the spot, watching his fleet burning. Debris was already starting to fall through the atmosphere, glowing chunks of metal and composite materials streaking across the sky like meteors. The humans didn't seem to care about the danger to their own planet. They just kept firing. "High Commander," Edward Brown said quietly. Trom had forgotten the human was there. He turned slowly, his mineral coating cracking in dozens of places from stress. Edward Brown was still smiling, but it was different now. This wasn't the friendly, diplomatic expression from before. "You had 10,000 warships," Edward said, emphasizing the past tense. "You had 10,000. The correction hit Trom like a knife to the heart. They had destroyed a quarter of his fleet. 2,500 ships, eliminated in the span of what? 3 minutes? 5? And they hadn't even used nuclear weapons. The realization sank through him slowly, like a blade sliding between his ribs. The galaxy was watching. His position as High Commander, his reputation as a military genius, his entire legacy, all of it was crumbling in real time, broadcast across the galaxy for everyone to witness.
You.
He struggled to find words, struggled to articulate the magnitude of humanity's mistake.
You have doomed your species. Do you understand? This changes nothing. The ships you destroyed were the weakest, the most expendable. Our capital ships remain untouched. We still have...
He did the quick mental calculation.
7,500 combat-capable vessels surrounding your world. Vessels your weapons cannot harm. And now you have given me justification.
He raised his arm, pointing at the sky, at the burning remains of his fleet.
I will order those 7,000 ships to blast your planet. Every city will burn. Every human will die. You attacked us. You destroyed Alliance property. Your pathetic attempt at defiance has only guaranteed your extinction.
Trom was shouting now, his voice reaching across the landing zone, broadcast to his remaining fleet, transmitted throughout Alliance space. Let them see his fury.
You will all die,
he said, his voice dropping to a growl.
Every man, woman, and child on this planet will burn for what you've done. And I will watch from orbit as your world becomes a tomb.
He activated his communicator, ready to give the order. The ground shook again. This time it wasn't vibration. This time it was movement. The landing pad beneath Trom's feet, what he had assumed was just paved ground, began to split apart. Sections of the surface lifted, tilting, rising. Before Trom could react, before he could even process what was happening, massive metal walls erupted from the ground around him. They weren't walls. They were segments of a dome, a huge, prefabricated structure that had been hidden beneath the surface, waiting. The sections rose with pneumatic force, angling inward, converging overhead. Trom tried to move, tried to activate his personal shielding to push through the rising barrier, but the metal was already there, already closing in. He turned in a circle, watching the dome's sections lock into place around him. The last gap closed overhead, and the prison assembled. Darkness. Complete darkness for 3 seconds. Then, emergency lighting activated, bathing the interior of the dome in harsh white light. Trom looked around wildly. The dome was perhaps 20 meters in diameter, the walls thick metal that looked like titanium alloy. Primitive, but dense. Edward Brown was inside the dome with him, standing calmly as if this had all been planned. Because it had been planned. Obviously, this entire thing had been a trap. But a trap for what purpose? To capture him? The dome wouldn't hold. His personal shielding was still active. He could feel the 7 layers around his body cycling through their defensive frequencies. He was untouchable inside this prison, and his communicator was still functioning. He could still hear chatter from the fleet, panicked reports of continued missile strikes, damage assessments, calls for orders.
This is pathetic,
Trom said, some of his confidence returning.
What is this supposed to accomplish? Do you think a metal cage can hold me? My shields will protect me indefinitely. I can contact my fleet. This buys you nothing except a few minutes.
I wouldn't be so sure about that, Edward said. He was walking casually toward one of the walls, his hand reaching for something on the surface.
What are you?
Edward pressed a panel. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a hatch leading downward. Down into the ground. Stairs descended into darkness. Do you want to know why we didn't use nuclear weapons in our strike against your fleet? Edward asked, looking back at Trom with that same cold smile.
You didn't want to contaminate your own planet,
Trom said automatically.
You chose conventional explosives to minimize radioactive fallout.
Wrong, Edward said cheerfully. That would be the logical assumption, but no. See, humanity has already survived several near-extinction events, including ones where we almost used nuclear weapons on ourselves. We have decontamination protocols, treatment options, long-term survival strategies. A few nuclear detonations wouldn't end humanity. Unpleasant, sure, but not fatal to the species. He gestured down the stairs. We didn't use nuclear weapons because we're keeping them here. With you. The implications took a moment to penetrate Trom's rage-clouded mind. When they did, his mineral coating went rigid with horror. Edward continued speaking, his tone conversational. This dome isn't just a prison, High Commander. It's a containment vessel. Beneath us, in the chamber at the bottom of those stairs, are approximately 60 nuclear warheads, varying yields mostly in the multi-megaton range. They're all set to detonate simultaneously if we receive the correct signal from human command.
You're bluffing,
Trom said, but his voice lacked conviction.
You wouldn't destroy yourself. You're the ambassador.
I volunteered for this position, Edward said quietly, his smile finally fading. Every human involved in this operation volunteered. We all understood the possible consequences. We all agreed that stopping your invasion was worth the cost. He moved closer to Trom, no longer maintaining any diplomatic distance. But here's the really interesting part, High Commander. We didn't just build a psychological profile of your entire command staff, though we did do that, using every communication you sent us, every transmission we intercepted, every bit of data we could gather about Varsok culture and military structure. We also noticed something very specific about you. Edward's eyes, dark brown, completely alien to Trom's pink, were steady and cold. You made yourself central to this entire invasion. You insisted on descending to Earth personally. You insisted on broadcasting your triumph across the galaxy. You made absolutely certain that every being in your alliance understood that this conquest was your achievement, your plan, your moment of glory. And when things went wrong, you immediately tried to assert direct control of the response. Trom said nothing. So we wondered, Edward continued, what would happen to your invasion if you died? Not just died, but died publicly, broadcast across the galaxy, blown apart by nuclear weapons while trying to conquer Earth. Would your fleet continue the attack? Would they glass the planet in retaliation, knowing it would mean their supreme commander was vaporized along with the planet's surface? He paused, letting the questions hang. Or would they hesitate? Would they start questioning their orders? Would the other species in your alliance start thinking that maybe this invasion wasn't such a good idea after all, that maybe the cost was higher than anticipated?
They would avenge me,
Trom said, but his voice was weak.
They would destroy Earth entirely.
Maybe, Edward agreed. Maybe they would. Or maybe, and I think this is more likely, maybe they would realize that this invasion has already failed, that continuing to engage with us would result in more losses, more humiliation, more damage to the Alliance's reputation. He moved back toward the hatch, one hand on the railing. "We're not going to destroy you, High Commander. Not yet. But we are going to make you an offer. Call off your fleet. Order them to withdraw. Begin negotiations with you as our prisoner. Do that and you walk out of here alive. You go home. You keep your life."
And if they refuse?
Trom demanded. Edward's smile returned. "Then we detonate the warheads. This entire area, several square miles, becomes a crater. I assume your shield can't handle this much energy, and we both die. Your flagship loses its commander, and we find out what happens when an alliance held together by fear and reputation suddenly loses both." Trom felt panic rising. His thoughts raced through options, possibilities, scenarios. Could his shields withstand a nuclear detonation at point-blank range? Those 7 layers were supposed to be strong, but how strong was that? What were the actual test parameters? Had anyone ever actually tested Varsok personal shielding against multi-megaton nuclear weapons at 0 distance? No, of course not. Why would they? What scenario would ever require it? "Your shields won't save you," Edward said, as if reading his thoughts. "We've been analyzing your tech. We're not certain, but we're fairly confident that your personal shielding can't handle this absurd amount of concentrated energy." He shrugged. "But maybe we're wrong. Maybe your shields would hold. Want to find out?"
You're insane,
Trom whispered.
Your species is insane. No rational being would.
"As I believe Commander Civi suggested," Edward interrupted. "Humans aren't always rational. Not in the way you define rationality." He descended one step down the stairs, then looked back. "The detonation command is held by human leadership. They're watching this conversation right now. If your fleet makes any aggressive move, they'll give the order. These warheads will detonate. You'll die, I'll die, and your alliance will have to decide whether revenge is worth continued engagement with a species that just proved it can hurt you." Edward descended another step. "I'm going down to the chamber now. Feel free to join me if you'd like to see the warheads, or stay up here, your choice. But either way, High Commander, your invasion is over. The only question left is whether it ends with negotiations or explosions." He disappeared down the stairs, leaving Trom alone in the dome. Trom stood frozen, his mind spinning. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't how invasions work. Species didn't trap commanding officers in nuclear suicide bombs in their important cities. But humans did. His communicator crackled. High Commander, please respond. The fleet is requesting orders. Do we engage? Do we retaliate? High Commander!" The voice was Krell, his subordinate, sounding panicked.
Stand by,
Trom said hoarsely.
All ships, stand by. No hostile action. I need a moment to assess the situation.
But High Commander, they attacked us. We've lost thousands of ships. If we don't...
Stand by!
Trom roared.
That is an order!
The channel went silent, except for background chatter from other ships, other commanders demanding guidance, requesting permission to fire. Trom looked down at the hatch leading to the chamber below. He could see faint illumination coming from the depths, could see the electronics. The warheads were real. This wasn't a bluff. He could order his fleet to attack. He could command them to bombard the planet regardless of his own life. He could go down in history as the commander who sacrificed himself to punish humanity's defiance. But he would be dead, and his legacy would be the greatest military disaster in Alliance history, broadcast across the galaxy for all to witness. Or he could negotiate. The word tasted like ash in his mind. Negotiate with primitives. What a joke. Faced with the choice between ordering his fleet to attack and guaranteeing his own death, or negotiating and preserving his life, Trom chose survival over glory for the first time in his career. He ordered all Alliance ships to cease aggressive actions and prepare for diplomatic negotiations. The command stunned his subordinates, but they obeyed. Edward Brown informed him the negotiations would take weeks, perhaps months, and that Trom would remain in the underground chamber as insurance throughout the process. The High Commander found himself reduced from supreme military leader to mere bargaining chip, a hostage whose continued existence depended on his fleet's cooperation. Within 36 hours of his capture, the Varsok War Alliance collapsed. The other commanders, Ivix, Moara, and Civi, never truly supported the invasion and now withdrew their forces, opening separate negotiations with humanity. Each cited Trom's failed strategy as justification, unwilling to risk further losses for a campaign that had already proven disastrous. The combined fleet that had darkened Earth's skies dispersed, ships returning to their homeworlds, leaving Trom's dreams of conquest in ruins. His life's work crumbled through fragmentary transmissions while he sat imprisoned beneath the planet he had come to conquer. The negotiations stretched from weeks to months, but the humans kept Trom imprisoned for 8 years. Long after the initial treaties were signed, they held him as insurance while they developed advanced defenses, improved their technology, and secured individual agreements with every species in the former alliance. Edward Brown remained his constant companion in captivity, never quite gloating but ensuring Trom understood how thoroughly he had been analyzed and manipulated. Every day in that chamber eroded more of Trom's authority as new commanders rose to power in his absence, and his reputation transformed from military genius to catastrophic failure. When humanity finally released him, Trom emerged to a galaxy that had moved on without him. His homeworld seemed alien. The leadership changed, his position as High Commander eliminated entirely and replaced by a council system designed to prevent such concentrated authority. History texts called the invasion Trom's Folly, the disaster that shattered the Varsok War Alliance and elevated humanity from primitive curiosity to respected galactic power. Military academies across multiple species taught his defeat as the Human Gambit, a case study in asymmetric warfare and turning an opponent's strengths into fatal weaknesses. Trom lived out his remaining years in obscurity, his horns now meaningless, his faded pink eyes reflecting a diminished existence far from the centers of power. He sometimes thought of Edward Brown and wondered if the human ever reflected on the alien commander he had defeated, not through superior firepower but through superior understanding. At night, Trom dreamed of descending through that purple beam, feeling like the most powerful being in the galaxy, only to wake to the reality of his legacy, not as a conqueror, but as a lesson. The galaxy would indeed remember the day 10,000 warships surrounded Earth, just not the way he had planned. High Commander Trom, who had conquered several worlds, had been defeated without losing a single battle, destroyed by an enemy stronger than humans, his own arrogance.